Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andrzej Milewicz. So I'm Professor Emeritus. I'm endocrinologist. I was Chief of Department of Endocrinology and Diabetology in University of Medicine in Wrocław, Poland. I was also the pro-rector of this university. I'm still active and I publish over 300 papers. And also, I am a member, honorary member of several gynecological endocrinology societies in the world. So the most important thing is during my publication, one is very important. In 2015, we published a Polish statement position according to endocrine disruptors many years ago. The problem with endocrine disruptors is take a long time, and it's a really big problem of our civilization. European Commission has a strategy of endocrine disruptors since 1999. As a 7 environmental action program adopted in 2013 by the European Parliament and Council provides for the harmonization of hazard-based criteria for the identification of endocrine disruptors. The first speaker is Professor Charles Sultan, and the topic is pregnancy, a sensitive window for endocrine disruptors exposure. Professor Sultan is a really very well-known, recognized scientist and pediatric endocrinologist. He's a professor of pediatric endocrinology, chief of INSERM Research Group, chief of Hormonal Center, chief of pediatric endocrinology unit in University Hospital in Montpellier. He has also served as a vice dean of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Montpellier. With over 435 published papers, numerous leadership roles in national and international pediatric and adolescent gynecology society, he has been recognized with awards such as Andre Prader Prize, and he significantly contributed to the field of endocrinology and reproductive medicine. So we have really experts. And so thank you, Charles, that you would like to be with us today. And the topic is, I repeat, pregnancy, a sensitive window for endocrine disruptor exposure. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew, for this nice introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you 25 years experience in the field of endocrine disruptor, clinical, epidemiologic, and molecular action. So within this 30 minutes, I will this is the general. I will talk about after a short introduction. I will give some definition about the endocrine disruptor chemical, and I will focus on the exposure of EDC during pregnancy, the role of the placenta, and I will give you some advice regarding the protection of the fetus. So as all OBGYN know, there are several risk factors for adverse pregnancy outcome that have been identified. Alcohol, cigarette smoking, substance use, drugs, and sufficient nutrition intake. But one risk factor received considerable attention in the recent years. I'm talking about the gestational exposure to environmental disrupting chemical. I will talk about EDC. So decades of work have established that pregnancy has a high susceptibility window to insult. We should consider pregnancy have a very risk period for this environmental chemical insult. And for the last 20 years, robust scientific evidence has emerged that demonstrating that periconception and prenatal exposure to chemical EDC can have a profound effect on growth and development across the life course. This is one of the main messages. Any exposure during fetal life may impact the rest of your life. And this concept has been normalized as the DOA hypothesis, the DOA concept, which is the developmental origin of health and disease. As you can see, any exposure during fetal life may impact childhood, puberty, reproductive life, midlife, as well as later life. We have to know that EDC exposure are nearly universal in pregnant women. We know that the exposure, the pregnant woman has many other human beings are exposed to thousands of EDC that are contained in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and consumer products, cosmetic. Exposure to EDC, this is the second message, is ubiquitous. The third message, which is, in my opinion, a key message, is the following one. Conversely to what we learned when we were younger as a medical student, we used to consider the placenta as a kind of barrier. So it appears during the last year, conversely to what we learned, what we taught, the womb don't protect the fetus from toxic chemical. This is also, in my opinion, a key message. The placenta should not be considered as a barrier that protects the fetus. Conversely to what we learn or what we taught, the placenta is now considered at the center of understanding disorder occurring during EDC exposure. And as I already mentioned, any change in the chemical environment during the fetal life can impact the health later in life. So what are we talking about? What are endocrine disruptor or endocrine disrupting chemicals? According to WHO, endocrine disruptor is a chemical substance, a chemical exogenous substance that alters function of the endocrine system and consequently may induce adverse health effects in an intact organism on its progeny or subpopulation. As you can see on this slide, and as I already mentioned, there are thousands of EDC. And to make the message a little bit clear, just remind that there are few classes of EDC, and beside the pesticide, which are the main cause of environmental exposure, the agrochemical, we have to consider polycystic aromatic hydrocarbon, heavy metals, parabens, plastic, I'm talking about bisphenol A as well as phthalate, industrial chemicals, and personal care. I think in this slide, we have, which is a little bit most clearer, you can see the fetus in the center is infused, is exposed to phthalate in personal care product, plastic manufacture resin, is exposed to bisphenol, mainly in food packaging, in PFAS, perfluoroalkyl substance, clothes contained in clothes and furniture, polychlorinated bisphenol, PCB, in pesticide, herbicide, fungicide, in solvent, in parabens, mainly contained in cosmetic and food preservative, as well as non-steroidal estrogen. But beside the chemical, don't forget that the fetus has the pregnant mother, the woman, is also contaminated by air pollution and specifically by particulate matter from a molecular weight 2.5. A second message, a third message, very important one, it's how should we consider EDC action? And it appears during the last year that the molecular action of EDC is very complex. First of all, EDC are endocrine disruptor. What does that mean? That means that they are able, these chemical substances are able to modify biosynthesis, production, circulation, action of hormone in target cell. But beside that hormonal disruption, don't forget, this is a very important to keep in mind, that EDC are able to induce metabolic changes, inflammation, they induce oxidative stress, they are able to modify the microbiome regulation, and last but not the least, EDC are involved in the epigenetic regulation of some genes, and these epigenetic alterations are responsible, and this is also a very important message, the transgenerational transmission of EDC. In other words, a pesticide contamination will not affect not only the fetus, the adult, but also the grandson or the granddaughter of the pregnant mother. So these chemical substances are considered to be mutagenic, teratogenic, as well as carcinogenic. So, in other words, and this is also important to consider, that the risk mitigation of an endocrine disruptor or a mixture of endocrine disruptor should result from statistical modeling, data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. So it's a little bit more complicated than we thought 20 years ago. So what do we know about exposure of EDC during pregnancy, and specifically an increased exposure? Before, just to remind that before affecting or impacting the fetus, the EDC are able to induce some pregnancy complication in the pregnant mother. They are able to induce hypertension, preeclampsia, preterm labor, pregnancy loss, fetal growth retardation, as well as change in the inflammation. So beside the direct effect in the pregnant mother, they are able to affect the fetus. So for the last 10 years, we learned that the cord blood, which is a kind image of the amniotic fluid, did contain almost 300 chemicals. All kinds of EDC have been found in cord blood. That means the fetus is swimming among 300 chemical substances. This is a work published some years ago that confirmed that in amniotic fluid, more than 40 EDC were identified. As I previously pointed out, the placenta has a key role in transducing the impact of endocrine exposure. First, there are several works that report that a lot of EDC are detectable in the placental unit and the placental fetal unit. So the placenta did contain several dozen of EDC. 2, EDC are able to modify the structure and the function of the placenta. As you can see, I don't have too much time to go into detail, but just remind that, you have the name of the EDC at the bottom of the slide, such as bisphenol, PCB, organotin, and so on. So EDC are able, and this is a very also important message, to modify, to alter growth and weight of the placenta. 2, sensitization, and 3, invasion and remodeling. So what can expect a lot of consequence for the fetus. Unfortunately, time is limited, but just keep in mind that the same EDC may act of different function of the placenta, which make the situation very complex. On apoptosis, lipid, placental weight, and so on. The same pesticide may have different targets. What are the consequences? Very briefly, the consequence of this exposure during the fetal life, most of you are familiar with this consequence, but very briefly remind you that EDC are responsible for disorder of sex differentiation in the newborn, small for gestational age, neurodevelopmental disorder, autism spectrum disorder, obesity and metabolic syndrome, early puberty, inflammatory and autoimmune disease, and in the adult life, dysfunction of the female and male reproduction, neurodegenerative disorder, and last but not the least, it has been proved recently that many cancers are related or associated to endocrine disruptor contamination. How to protect the fetus? So we have to educate pregnant women about EDC. This is also a key message I would like to share with you through knowledge, attitude, and practice. The FIGO, the International Federation of Gynecological and Obesity, has published, several advice, recommendation for preventing EDC contamination during pregnancy. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to share with you this proposal that based on 4 aspects. We have to keep in mind 4 aspects. We have to advise our pregnant women to have a healthy lifestyle, to choose a balanced diet, not to use a pesticide in food, and lastly, to regularly to have a very specific hygiene action. So, in conclusion, you know, the topic we are discussing this afternoon, it's an international aspect for women and pregnant women from all over the life, all over the world. And as you can see, time has pointed out this aspect, how the first 9 months shape the rest of your life. It's exactly what I try to demonstrate you within the last 20 minutes. And unfortunately, this slide is a little bit complex, but this slide resumes one of the key messages I would like to share. EDC are able to modify placental structure. The same EDC is able to modify placental structure and function to induce pregnancy complication and to have long-term effect in newborn as well as in adult subject. This is another one. This is for stellate, but it's the same message. So it's becoming more and more apparent that EDC can affect the health of pregnant women as well as their offspring. EDC during pregnancy is a concern, and I'm glad that ESG has included this specific topic in the webinar cycle of gynecological endocrinology. It's a concern because new chemicals are developed each day. So it's imperative that OBGYN address critical questions concerning EDC and lifelong consequence for offspring of exposed mother. And crucial decisions for government agencies are necessary to prevent or at least to minimize fetal exposure to EDC. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention from Montpellier, France, where we do have the oldest school of medicine in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for a brilliant lecture. Dear participants, now is time to prepare the question to Professor Sultan. You have a fantastic occasion to face-to-face to speak with such an expert. So I provoke you to prepare this as a question and send you as quick as possible. So the second speaker is Professor Svetlana Vujovic, Professor of Internal Medicine, Endocrinologist, Faculty of Medicine, University of Belgrade, Serbia, the Director of Clinic for Endocrinology, Diabetes and Disease of Metabolism, Head of National Center for Infertility and Endocrinology of Gender, University Clinical Center in Belgrade in Serbia. She's also the president of Serbian Society for Endocrinology of Gender and the member of the board of International Society Gynecological Endocrinology Society. The topic which Svetlana presents us is very provocative and very interesting, and endocrine disrupting chemicals and premature ovarian insufficiency. Svetlana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Professor Milevic. And first of all, I would like to thank Professor Giannattani for creating such a wonderful webinars and spreading knowledge all around the world. And I'm honored to have such two speakers with me these days. So let's start with this title. Premature ovarian insufficiency is defined as oligoramenorrhea, at least 4 months, with FSH over 40 or estradiol below 50 in women younger than 40 years of age. But of course, there are 4 grades of POI, and there are many other suggestions for FSH from Escher, etc. But we have to make a diagnosis as soon as possible. Hippocrates, father of medicine, used to say that human health can't be treated separately from the natural environment. So endocrine disruptors are very important, and exposome, meaning total exposure of persons to endocrine disruptors, and more than 800 chemicals have endocrine disrupting potential. And we have heard from Professor Sultan that there are cancerogenous, mutagenic, teratogenic effects of many of them. And of course, they are influencing all the way from early antral follicle to the corpus luteum on every level. So we are not quite sure that we know about all of that when we are talking with our patients. Endocrine disrupting chemicals interfere with the synthesis, secretion, transport, metabolism, binding activities, or elimination of natural hormones, homeostasis, reproduction, and developmental processes. They interfere with hormonal activity through steroid hormone receptors, non-steroid receptors, orphan receptors, and enzymatic pathways of biosynthesis and or metabolism of steroids. And this is a slide we have already seen. But what is interesting, all of that endocrine disrupting chemicals can be phthalates, flame retardants, phenols, polychlorinated bisphenyl's, pesticides, phytoestrogens even more, and polyaromatic hydrocarbons influencing the body of the one female. And they are present in everything what's all around us, and they can be seen in various kinds of metals, like arsenic or manganese or lead or zinc, etc., or personal care products, which we are using every day in cosmetics, where we can find parabens, phthalates, glycol ethers, fragrances, etc., and we are not thinking about that. And of course, many of them are in chemical products and in pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, etc. And how can they influence ovarian function? Through direct diminishing ovarian reserve and decreasing anti-Muller's hormone, estradiol per inhibin B, and FSH per FSH and LH ratio, which will be increased, leading to declined fertility and fecundity. And if we are talking about any of that EDs, then we have to think about primordial follicle and all other follicles to antral, and all of them leads to infertility. So premature ovarian insufficiency can be caused by non-perspirant pesticides, organophosphates, carbamates, pyrethroids, and metabolism of these substances is in the positive correlation with gonadotropins and negative with inhibin B and steroids. And when we are talking about the mechanisms of action of all of them, first of all, they're binding to receptors. If they're binding to agonists like bisphenol A, phthalates, polyphenols, UV screens, then their major effect is estrogenic, and they have adverse biological effects on reproduction, uterus, and mammary gland. In a case of binding to antagonist receptors, like pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, they have anti-androgenic effects, and it directly has adverse effects on reproduction. So all of that substances influence some enzymes and their synthesis or inhibit synthesis and inhibit affected step of synthesis. Or they, like isoflavones, inhibit thyroid peroxidase. Polyphenols have effects on sulfatase and sulfotransferase. And isoflavones, or polyfluorinated bisphenols, induce transthyretin. And these are ways to make biological effects on all steroids, life-threatening adrenal corticosteroid problems, or on hypothyroidism, or free estrogen increase, or they may be altered amounts of free thyroid hormones. Effects of signaling pathways on POI, their activation of primordial follicle are disturbed communication between oocytes and granulosa cells. Then protein kinase B, an extracellular regulated kinase, influences regulation of follicular growth. So follicular growth can be inhibited. Phosphatidylate in oocytes inhibits follicle activation by dephosphorylation, phosphatidylinositol 3P, enabling phosphorylation and activation of ACT. Is the way of keeping transcriptional factors FOXO3 target molecules in nucleus. We can conclude that activation of primordial follicles is possible after PTEN inhibition and stimulation of ACT activity. And the most well-known of all of that endocrine disrupting chemicals are BPAs, phthalates, and PBDEs, and we have heard about them, a lot of that. But bisphenol A in polycarbonate plastics is all around us in food emballage. So we have to change something, and we have to think how to prepare all that food in something another like glass or something like that. Over 6 billion pounds are produced of them every year, and over 100 tons are released in the atmosphere. It shows tenfold higher affinity to estrogen receptor beta and downregulates expression in cells that express them. It is found in amniotic fluid, placenta, serum of pregnant women, and positive correlation with FSH and negative with inhibin B and estradiol protestosterone has been observed. All of that damages oocytes, stops cellular cycles, induces apoptosis, and aneuploidy of gametes causing POI. Of course, and very importantly, they can stimulate breast carcinomas. Phthalates are xenobiotics in toys, in coatings of pharmaceutical pills, in cables, plastics, cosmetics, drugs, and all of them inhibits aromatase, increase peroxisome proliferation, and decrease reproduction. Negative correlation was found with FT4, FT3, with all that MEHP through PPR gamma, which suppress estradiol production. And all that increase insulin resistance, which is a factor more for complicated pregnancy rate. TCDD decreases FSH-induced LH expression of receptors. DDE increases vascular endothelial growth factor and exposure of IGF-1 in luteinized granulosa cells, causing POI, PCOS, and endometriosis, which we have to think about also. MEHP through PPH gamma suppress estradiol. So all of them alter ovarian steroidogenesis, and BPA phthalates and paraben inducing LH changes and consequently all other hormones. And phthalates and gentian and parabens induce FSH changes of androstenedione and all other steps of steroidogenesis to the end to progesterone. So there are no steps that are not influenced on. Prenatal exposure are very well explained by Professor Sultan, and all of them induced ovarian IGF-1 signaling pathway and more atretic follicles in all that babies. So later on, even in adolescent period and later on in reproductive period, some of them can be candidate for premature ovarian insufficiency, but nobody is asking mothers what they have been exposed to, or maybe what are their habits. What's about cigarette smoking? Toxins from cigarette smoke inhibit expression of PTEN signaling pathway through PI3K mechanism in oocytes, leading to increased loss of follicles and POI. Of course, they are not just one of them, but we have to have this situation in mind also. Lead, cadmium, and arsen exposure induce toxin during or after embryogenesis, and it may be irreversible changes of dysfunction and POI. The toxins that primarily destroyed pre-ovulatory follicle induce immediate loss of ovarian function. Heavy metals were found in follicular fluid after exposure of neonates and fetuses to endocrine modulators, and reproductive disturbances and infertility with carcinogenic potential can be seen later on in lives of that women. Lead is neurotoxic agents with direct influence on steroidogenesis. So just the amount on all that metals, heavy metals, are very important and can induce later on changes. What's about 5G and everything which we are surrounded by? Many people say, oh, it's nothing, never mind, it will be nothing in our bodies, but step by step, all these substances influence the body of ladies, but of course, as also with male and the decreasing of spermatogenesis, making changes in reproductive tracts. A systematic review and meta-analysis, including 97 studies, shown that phthalates, adverse IVFs, and pesticides have negative impact on ovarian function. What are mechanisms? They induce apoptosis or atresia of primary and primordial follicles. Then oxidative stress is present and modification in DNA methylation. Of course, also increase of follicular recruitment and refractory follicles. And in POI patients, we have measured decrease superoxide dismutase and glutathione peroxidase and increase malondialdehyde. All of them very negatively influence oocyte and inducing POI. So when we are talking about of all these factors, then we are talking about follicles, but also they influence DNA and protein synthesis, very important for the replication and for changing in DNA in all that patients. What's happened in previous my country, because I'm living in Serbia, a part of former Yugoslavia, but unfortunately we was bombed by NATO in 1999. And then in first 3 days, 100 civilians were dead in that time. And that was very terrible time, which I spent in my hospital. And Serbs will never forget it because that NATO operation was called Merciful Angel, with many collateral damages, meaning killing people, representing crime against humankind. And today we are talking about green agenda. But is it maybe sometimes ironic when we are talking about green things and putting bombs wherever today in the world? But we have experience in what's going on later on. So after 25 years after bombing, consequences are miscarriages and increased carcinogenesis in my country caused by, let's say, changes from bombing one small town next to Belgrade. It was a chemical industry in that small town. And during one bombing, 1,500 tons of vinyl chloride burned into the air, which is 3,000 times higher than permitted levels. 15,000 tons of ammoniac was there, 800 tons of hydrochloric acid, 250 tons of liquid chlorine, and 100 tons of mercury. And it was bombed. So everything go in the air and in the rivers, in the ground, everywhere around. And Makavisto, one great interesting man from UN, talking about environmental factor and published in the New York Times, that the most dangerous moment then occurred during bombing was in fire, and then smoke was in the air with all that substances. So it was the biggest danger in the groundwater. Danube is a river which is passing through Belgrade. It was polluted, and more than 100,000 tons of cancerogens were unleashed into the air, water, and soil. And today it is doing all around the world, wherever wars are, and we were just an experiment, first one in the world maybe. Uranium bombs induce directly premature ovarian insufficiency, and radiation directly induced chromosomes. Dense chromosomes are more resistant to radiation than diffuse chromatin, and plasma membrane rather than DNA is the target with the ionization. The human oocyte membrane is less sensitive than some other places. And then I, like a scientist and a doctor who were there in Belgrade during that 3 months of bombing, following up later on what will be with POIs. Because before bombing, we have a very low incidence in 1995, let's say. But later on, I'm following up, and today we have the biggest database of POI patients in Europe. After that, I think it's France and many other countries. And what's going with that incidence? It was increasing. You can see these graphs and look at this increasing rate after many years after bombing, being the highest rate in 2013. So 14 years after that. And that rate was nearly on the same levels later on, in 2016, and a little bit decreased later, but then COVID stopped all other continuing up because patients were closed in houses and COVID infection completely changed these other situations. So this is experiment in vivo in POI patients after bombing. And we can see something similar in all other regions around the world today, which are in the war. And maybe it is the way for decreasing number of inhabitants of this planet. One of the models, and many other are here, and we doctors have to say something. We must have our own experience and advise sometimes politicians and others. And what was other problems? Ovarian cancers in 34% of POI patients, and other borderline tumors, were increased. Of course, some benign diseases also increased after that, like, let's say, gonadoblastomas, or let's say cyst adenofibromas, etc. And we are not later on thinking about bombing when we are in 2020s, then some viruses are around us, but all of that is connecting each with other things, and we have to think about the reproduction of women. But I think that the most dangerous is transgenerational effect all over that. And there are consequences of epigenetic changes of DNA and has a correlation with coding sequences. Putative mechanisms can be methylation, histone modification, chromosome structure, organization of DNA, and nucleus separation and non-coding functions of RNA. So they can be present in many other generation later. And what can say cytogenetic analysis? Sister chromatid exchange tests shown that it's methylated detection of exchanged genetic material, DNA, between chromatides in chromosomes as a consequence of exposition of mutagenic and cancerogenic materials from environmental places, and micronucleus detects gene and chromosomes mutation and chromatin bodies which are formed after chromosome disturbances. So in persons exposed to ionizing radiation or drugs or alcohol, micronucleus is increased, causing DNA damages. So DNA is changing, and very often we are not thinking about that. So when we are coming to conclusion, we have to say that very often none of us are thinking about many things from everyday things we have contact with. And with all of that, which we passed through, or maybe we don't know that we are under, let's say, radiation or some chemical exposures, but we have to think about that. It is essential for scientists and the public health to be very thankful about of the deleterious chemicals that are present in items which we are every day by everybody of us, and most importantly, we have to think about children and pregnant women. And one great person of my people, of my country, Serbian person, Nikola Tesla, very well known in the whole world and planet, native Serb, living in the USA, used to say that if you want to find the secrets of the universe, we have to think in terms of energy of peace, the world of free people and nations equal in dignity and respect to every single person. So we have to think about everyone, and we think that planet is now overcrowded, and we don't have to reduce the number of people on any kind of way, and we are trying to improve it. And nature's beauty, smiling, empathy, friends have unsurpassed positive anti-stress effects on the organism, increasing adaptability, immune response of every one of us, longevity, producibility, and quality of life. And this is my dream team, just a part of my dream team for the Belgrade National Center for Infertility. And we are open-minded, and we like to collaborate with all doctors from all around the world who to know something new and to share ideas. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
So, Svetlana, many thanks for your brilliant lecture. And now we have a time for questions. So I receive a lot of questions. So the first question is, I think I have not understood what are exactly endocrine disruptor, which molecule is there a list?
Many of them, not just one, and great studies have to be done about that specific molecule because it's not just one, and the special disruptors have to be studied for any kind of molecules, and that need a great international study. I know that you have a great lab for that, and in some other countries, but it will be a very, very nice scientific research in the future for answering of your question.
So the second question is, how can we completely eliminate microplastic from our food stores? Maybe Charles can answer for that question.
In my opinion, this is a crucial point of EDC contamination. Just an example, in a few minutes, I recently learned that in France, we produce 1 million of plastic bottle per year. 1 million of plastic bottle. So there is no way to eliminate plastic for our environment. It must be a governmental institutional decision. There is no way. I will add one very important information. A few weeks ago, there is a paper published in a good review that report the presence of nanoplastic particle in the testes as well as the follicle of human beings. And some months ago, another group reported the presence of these plastic microparticles in the brain. Okay, so we have to reconsider the use of plastic for all kinds of stuff, for food, for conservation, for medical disposal, for everywhere. Millions of tons are produced in each our country, everywhere.
Thank
So
you.
it should be a national or a WHO decision, unless we won't be able to reduce or to suppress contamination by plastic.
So the next
Very good question.
The next question is from Mexico. Hello, my name is Marcela Pena. Greetings from Mexico. My question is, if we know ADC can be everywhere, which would be a recommended method of evaluation in the context of precocious puberty?
Very good question. I think the link, the demonstration of any relationship between EDC, one EDC or a mixture of EDC and a specific pathology will be based on, one, the mechanism of action of the considered EDC. If he does have a xenoestrogenic action, he's a candidate for precocious puberty. Two, the concentration, the evaluation of this EDC in the blood. Three, the presence of a cluster of some specific pathology, such as precocious puberty, in relation with any risk of EDC contamination. For instance, if we do have in a specific agriculture area, high prevalence of precocious puberty. If you are able to demonstrate that people use specific pesticide with estrogen-like activity, there is some not direct evidence, but highly suspicion of the link between this EDC and precocious puberty. We have published several papers on this topic, so I can, if you send me an email, I can forward you a better scientific response.
The next question is, how can we measure all these substances in our daily life? For instance, if a person uses a single cosmetic product that contain of endocrine disruptors, how we can advise? Wood is full of pollution. How is possible to avoid the contact?
So
Maybe I can answer, or you, Professor.
I mean, do you want me to answer, or?
Yes,
Yes,
Professor.
Svetlana, tell me.
You decided.
You know, I'm not a macho, but I will answer.
Okay.
Now,
Okay. Yeah. Please,
Svetlana,
Professor. Yes, yes, please.
it's just a joke, you know that. No, we have some way to evaluate the contamination of a cosmetic or of some products by measuring in the blood some specific component of the cosmetic. For instance, if it does contain parabens, we are able to measure parabens, but there are many, many conjugates of parabens. So it's a difficult point. I mean, to prove a link between one EDC and one specific consequence, it's a little bit difficult. It's a conjunction of several aspects: the mechanism of action, the composition of the substance, the area, the specific disease known to be linked to estrogenic action, and so on and so on. It's not a direct way to evaluate the responsibility of a cosmetic, for instance. But if you use only one, you reduce the consequence. Just to remind you, just that a paper published 2 years or 3 years ago report that women used to use cosmetics and personal care products. I mean, the amount of this product range from 20 to 35. So if you use only one cosmetic, you don't run a high risk.
Thank you. There's a question to Professor Vujovic. What is exposome?
It is a totally explosion of or endocrine disruptors of one person. So everything could influence us is exposome of endocrine disruptors. That's the definition.
Thank you so much. The next question is, can we use supplements aiming at glutathione rise to minimize the negative effect of endocrine disruptors?
This is a question for Svetlana.
Yes, we can, but it is just one of many other things which we had to change, not only glutathione, but many others of them. That's it.
Okay. So that it's thanks to Professor Sultan for answer for the question. It's Damodar Mangalore Kini. Is probably ladies. So the next question is come from Ukraine. In Ukraine, we have a war too. I notice a little of cancer in young women. Can you give your comments due to how and which test can I offer patient to reduce cancer risk, especially breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and thyroid cancer?
I hope it's for me, or
Yeah.
yes, I can.
I'm a pediatrician.
Yeah, unfortunately, in a situation when something is going on, then it is very difficult to detect many things in war times because there are not enough amount of blood analysis or anything because it's not normal situation. But if it's possible to be so far away from that places, that's much better. But who knows where will bomb go down? That's a problem. And the most important will be to stop it as soon as possible and not expose, because a broad area is under all that influences, and later on we can't understand what happened in fact, and we are, let's say, 100 kilometers from that place. So the future will show something like that in Serbia in 1999 later on.
Okay, thank you so much. Question to Professor Sultan. Does placenta protect fetus from ADC contamination?
No, I demonstrate no, conversely to what we learned, what we thought, the placenta is not a barrier. It's a target for EDC. Moreover, it does concentrate EDC, and EDC have a specific action. I'm sorry I wasn't clear enough, but I tried to demonstrate that EDC act on the differentiation and growth of the placenta, and through this action, it may induce several consequences to the fetus. So the placenta is not a protection. No, it's a target for EDC.
Okay. The next question is, one relatively new growing problem is vaping addiction along with no tobacco addiction, with all the negative results apparently now well published in the media. Very young children are used it also pregnant women thinking no harm or less harm. What to do?
In the future, studies will give that data for a longer period, but it's just a different kind of one another endocrine disrupting chemicals. But these are really chemicals, not cigarette smoking, but something like that. And it's a way how to addict a young person to be later on someone who will use cigarettes or something else, and it's a not good way for protect them.
I have a question to Charles. Charles, what is your opinion about breastfeeding? Because as a woman detoxicated with milk to the children, it's better to use artificial milk or the milk from the mother.
Thank you, Andrew, for this specific question. It's really difficult to answer to this point. As a pediatrician, I would advise, performing breeding, but as having some experience in EDC and knowing that breast milk does contain several EDC, I have to evaluate. It's not a general rule, but evaluate woman by woman according to its own environment. And if she does run any risk of being contaminated, I should disadvise breastfeeding. I'm sorry, it's a very difficult point. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for raising this question.
Thank you. So we have a next question. Knowing that GSH, reduced glutathione, is the number one scavenger of the toxic substance in human body, should we recommend supplementation which increase GSH to all women undergoing IVF?
The best way will be to measure it and then to add it, but in many products, there are just one of substances among many others which we advise to women prior to pregnancy in preparing for pregnancies. So if it's possible, it's very nice to measure it before.
So the next question comes from Ukraine. Greetings from Ukraine. Today, henesten and phytoestrogens have been mentioned as negative endocrine disruptors, and study in Asia women repeatedly show their positive effects. Should these components be used in perimenopausal, menopausal women as alternative sources of estrogens?
When we are talking about phytoestrogens, then they are estrogens with very low potencies. So, in the very beginning of climacterium, meaning period before menopause, it can be a little effect on some of symptoms if they are very mild. Otherwise, they are very often like placebo in women which had undetectable estradiol levels. And in the menopause, I mean in women who are 1 year after the last menstruation, and if estradiol is very low, then phytoestrogens will not be enough to suppress all that symptoms they have. Even more in adnexectomized women, phytoestrogens are very, very low level medications, and they will still have all other symptoms, early and late complications. So the most important is to add that concentrations of hormones which are enough to be in a mid-follicular phase for women in the menopause. All other very low levels are not enough for the longer beneficial effects of HRT.
So the next question is I just want to congratulate to both speakers for excellent webinar.
Thank you very much.
As a cooperation of government to control this problem.
Thank you.
The next is also comments. Even if we can measure parabens, we can advise to test every single person.
Yes.
It is, if
Yes.
it's possible, but it's.
I agree.
The most product of QR code or other code on the product. More are apps that one could use to scan the code of this product. This we know what the integrated each product, and especially the possibility of containing microplastic.
This is a very, very good comment, because it raised a lot of concern regarding the composition of drugs and even vaccine. This morning, I received a message from friends or from colleagues that reports that anti-COVID vaccine did contain several unexpected EDC. So we don't know the composition. Nobody is able to give or to share the exact composition of drugs, vaccine, medication, everything. So I think it's a general concern, and it's also a political point, that should be raised about our deputy and senator. But it's a very important question. And I received the information this morning or yesterday regarding COVID vaccine. And I was very concerned by this information, actually.
This question to Professor Vujovic: how endocrine disrupting chemicals interfere with hormonal activity?
They directly influenced all steps of steroidogenesis, so from cholesterol to estradiol, progesterone, testosterone. And of course, they influence and thyroid gland and adrenals. So all endocrine system is under these EDs. And the question is, which one will be more sensitive to them? So as a consequence, sometimes we can have adrenal crisis if one of them is very harmful. There are many mechanisms, and I've told about that. So we have to think about whole endocrine system when they are interfering with.
So the next question is, how do the, also to Svetlana, do the pesticide organophosphates induce premature ovarian insufficiency? I think that your lecture answer for that question, but
yes,
so
yes.
maybe one conclusion.
Yes, in fact, I've shown it in my slides. Maybe someone can look it once again, because there is a whole mechanisms. How can it do it? I mean that our goal will be to think about pesticides. What can we do? Because today it's really impossible to have organic food, really, but we are trying to do something to change it. And even when pesticides are in a focus, we have to think about the new generation, which are efficient, but with small other adverse effects.
So we have also a very provocative and interesting question. I also want to ask a question about botulinum toxin used in cosmetology. Can we also consider it as a potential disruptors? What do you think?
For me, yes, but it's a question or amount, and how often will it be repeated, because that persons want to repeat it from time to time. And any kind of toxins are something that influence not only the place where they are inserted, but also a brain. And that's something that people are not thinking about. So it can be a kind of, but as a scientist, I am always waiting for scientific results from a special group working on that problem.
The question is to Charles. Could ADC exposure during gestational have a long-term effects?
Let me read the question, because I did.
Could ADC exposure during gestation have long-term effects?
Oh, yes. This is one of, oh, definitely, yes. This is one of the main message I share with you. The concept of fetal origin of adult disease. Any exposure during the fetal life may induce several diseases in the neonatal, in the pubertal, in adult, as well as late in life. One of the best examples was given by the diethylstilbestrol that contribute to the concept of the DOA, the developmental origin of adult disease hypothesis. You know, a woman who took diethylstilbestrol during gestation did have children that present malformation in the newborn period, adenocarcinoma of the cancer, and later on breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and many other diseases we report in many, many recent papers we published. So, yes, the main interest of studying EDC is the fact that they may use early, late, and very late consequence. Moreover, which is raised many, many concerns, we contribute with other groups to demonstrate the transgenerational effect of endocrine disruptor. And for instance, we report an adenocarcinoma of the vagina, not in a daughter of a pregnant mother who took this, but in a granddaughter of someone who took this during gestation. So there is evidence that yes, prenatal contamination induces early, late, or late consequence, and this consequence could be transmitted to the next generation.
Okay, so we published a couple of years ago, there's a paper which shows that bisphenol A serum levels was correlated negatively with vitamin D binding protein, which can explain that it can be one of the reasons that we observe so frequent the vitamin D deficiency in our population. And
Yes,
it is
yes.
some data about a relation between bisphenol A and sex-binding globulin?
I think as a xenoestrogen, it could bind to some binding protein. I don't know which specific binding protein, but it may interfere, yes, with some binding globulin. As a xenoestrogen, obviously, he must be bound to a binding protein. I don't know which one specifically, but why not?
And according to the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, do you think that the endocrine disruptors can play some role in etiology of this disease, which we observe very frequent now with obesity, especially with obesity?
I think it's much more the consequence of obesity itself, and not a specific way of exposure. Obesity has been reported for the last year to be linked to many endocrine disruptors, and obesity is a favoring factor to develop non-alcoholic disease.
I have the question from the audience: how to prevent the side effect of isoflavonoids, and how long is the intake suggested?
Maybe Svetlana.
How to prevent, wherever they are, we have to think and to see where they are and try to escape from that. I mean, whenever it's possible to take care about that, what we are in contact with and where we are taking. So nothing special, but we have just to think more about all these, what we are taking by food, by ingestion on the skin or everywhere. And very often we are not thinking on that way. So that's the point, to be more careful about all of that, what we are taking. Nothing special.
And the next question is very practically: how can I get a conference recording? so you received a tantium probably. So that's a question to organizer. So I think so. We notice your question is Sitora Muminova. We try to answer your question as quick as possible. And also the next question is: could you please recommend some bibliography? So the website, I think, is
Yes, that's
General,
great.
I sent
spend
several
a couple of hours
Yes.
and study.
I,
Okay,
I sent to the organizing committee several references.
okay, thank you so much. And a question from Anna. Could you please explain how increased anti-Mullerian hormone in obesity can contribute to metabolic disorders? That's to Svetlana.
Yes, when we are talking about anti-Muller's hormone, because the author was Miller, so anti-Miller's hormone, not Millerian, that's a bad pronunciation, is very important because we know that in PCOS it can be higher than the normal range, but it is just one of many other hormones which are necessary for telling about ovarian reserve. Others are FSH, LH, estradiol, inhibin B, and number of antral follicles. And then we can conclude something about all of that. So it is a great value of anti-Muller's hormone in the very beginning of its existence. And some women were very disappointing when they know that they have low levels, even they were in depression and having higher FSH because of that. But we have to destroy that great fear of AMH because it is just one hormone which is necessary for us doctors, professors, to explain what's going on in the body of that woman. So when we are talking about metabolism, then the other hormones, on the first place, insulin is very important in all that steps of pregnancies, preparing women for pregnancies, and interfering with not just anti-Muller's hormone, but with all other hormones. And it's important that women has to think about their weight because before being pregnant, because great weight, overweight, and even just a few kilos more can be of disaster for a new pregnancy.
So, dear friends, dear speakers, thank you for your excellent, fantastic presentation and a really great discussion. So, as you notice, people are really interested in the topics because it's very, very important and very new. How they're not new, but still we learn a lot new things. And thank you for your attention. And so, see you soon in the next webinar organized by societies at the menopause hormone therapy, how to minimize the risk and maximize the benefits. With excellent speaker, Professor Stevenson and Professor Alfred Moek, with patronage, of course, Professor Andrea Genazzani. And also, we are cordially invite you to Rome in 2026 on March for the 22nd World Congress of Gynecological Endocrinology International Society. Thank you for your attention. Have a nice day. So, see you. Bye.
Thank you. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
Svetlana.
Thank you.